What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today we're going to be taking a look at a gold conquest run. I wasn't really feeling the quantum tunnel the other day, so instead of playing ranked, I decided to hop in a gold conquest, and it went pretty well. The first match was pretty straightforward. My opponent actually snapped on turn 1. I don't know if they thought we were in proving grounds or something, but I'm gonna snap back on turn 5 when it becomes obvious that I'll be able to full combo. Even if I don't have Silver Surfer yet, I can still full combo here with Mystique and Hazmat plus Absorbing Man and Luke Cage. And at this point, I'm probably either going to draw Odin or Silver Surfer and be able to have a big combo with either of those cards. And I could still potentially draw Odin next turn, so you could play Silver Surfer here. However, if my opponent is going to retreat, showing them the Silver Surfer on turn 6 will make that retreat come out. So I'm just going to hang on to the Silver Surfer and just lock myself into Silver Surfer plus Absorbing Man for that final turn, which is still plenty good enough to beat most decks here. And like I said, my opponent not really seeming like they are going to throw in the towel. They skipped on turn 5, so they probably have a pretty reasonable combo for themselves, and we'll see that they do with Shuri into She-Hulk and Taskmaster, and then I think a Jeff with the remaining 2 energy, and that's pretty good. That's like the best thing that their deck can do. It's just not going to beat one of the best things that this deck can do. This deck is really good, really fun. Like I said, this first one was a pretty straightforward match. My opponent's just going to wind up retreating here after we beat them for 8 cubes. But the next match is the one that I'm really excited about showing off. That's the reason, basically, that I created this video. I was thinking about just doing the next match, but there was too much that I wanted to say. Too much fun stuff happens in that one. So we'll move to that one now. Misremembered a little bit. It was armor in addition to that Taskmaster, but regardless, not going to be enough power to take on the Silver Surfer. This second match kicks off with a Quinjet from my opponent, and then our second location is going to be TVA. And while TVA is not a great location for this deck, I mean, we can do some powerful things, sometimes winning TVA with Brood and Absorbing Man. We don't have the Brood in this case, though, but I still think that snapping here is pretty good EV because I'm actually planning on magicking. And Magik can be a little bit scary against a deck that has Snow Guard. My opponent might also be planning on Snow Guarding the TVA or something. The fact that they retreat kind of tells me that they don't have Snow Guard here. But yeah, I just thought that was like a free way to gain a cube, and now my opponent is potentially thinking that I'm a deck that's good into TVA, and I know that they're probably like a Loki deck. So I've got a little bit more information than my opponent. And speaking of information, this is the highlight clip right here. I get Rogue from White Palace. And Rogue is interesting because it's actually a lot worse when you know Rogue is coming, when you have that information. I could potentially use Rogue to like protect my Sera or something weird like that if I know my opponent is going to Rogue it. And then from Daily Bugle, I also get Rogue. So that's going to lead to a really silly play here. My opponent is going to cable me on turn 2. And then turn 3, I'm actually not going to wind up saving this Rogue. I'm going to use the Rogue to steal Quinjet from my opponent because they're going to make a Quinjet's one of the best cards in the deck. So I think using my opponent's Rogue proactively, taking that Quinjet away from them is going to be good. It is going to mean that my second Rogue is cheaper, plus whatever I grab off of Mirror Dimension this turn, which is going to be another White Palace, which this time gives me a Mockingbird. But here is where things get tricky. See, I know that my opponent has a Rogue, right, from both of these locations. I could just play Mockingbird this turn. I could just play, any other card in my hand for the most part. But I think my opponent is going to use Rogue to steal my Rogue that I use to steal their Quinjet. So if I play Rogue, my opponent has priority here. they will steal the Quinjet first, and then I'm gonna take it right back. So I thought this was a really, really cheeky play and a ton of fun. Even if it's not like super important necessarily to battle over a Quinjet, it still disrupts what my opponent is trying to do, and Rogue is a 3-cost card. So that's kind of cool. They're also both cards that did not start in my deck, so they're both going to make Mockingbird cheaper, and then the Quinjet ability will make Mockingbird now only cost 2. So with that, I'm feeling pretty good, and I'm going to snap here. This turn, I can play Sebastian Shaw alongside this Mockingbird, which I think might actually not have been the correct play. I'm not sure. There's a bunch of different potential options here. I might have gotten suckered into this one, but then my opponent is going to Loki on turn 5. And at the very least, it's a Loki without the power of Quinjet, but it's still, you know, a Loki, which is pretty good. And now it's the final turn of the game because I draw Magik here on turn 6, so I didn't have any time to set this up. But I can still put a decent amount of power on the board. Ironheart is effectively 8 power, and then Silver Surfer is effectively like 10 power or so. And it's a little bit about trying to figure out where my opponent is going to commit to. We can still, with this, like the Ironheart triggers and the Silver Surfer will pump up these rogues. So we're battling for all 3 locations here is what I'm getting at. And that's never terrible, but realistically, my opponent is probably not going to try to battle against my Sebastian Shaw. Maybe I could have seen that coming and not used Ironheart, which is really just throwing away some power into that Sebastian Shaw location. But Silver Surfer, still a bunch of power. Unfortunately, not quite going to be enough. My opponent plays Luke Cage plus Hazmat. If I had played my own Luke Cage, it actually would have been way more power than Ironheart. So despite a really sweet read from my opponent, Loki gets me in the end, and my opponent takes me for 4 cubes. Kind of a bummer, but I thought that was a really, really fun game nonetheless. And we're still doing all right here. 6 cubes to my opponent's 9. So we have still got some time left in this one. My opponent and I both have pretty straightforward curves this game. Quinjet, Sentinel, Hope Summers, Loki is a really, really fantastic curve for my opponent. But it also means that I don't have to worry about Snow Guard now, probably, and we are probably going to get to use the 7th turn this game, which is really, really fantastic for me. And I get to play Sera on turn 5, which means I'm kind of setting up to do some really big combos here. I could play a bunch of stuff this turn, and then Odin, Silver Surfer plus Odin next turn. So definitely a lot of options, and with that, I'm going to snap. But mostly, I'm snapping to the idea that my opponent probably doesn't have as good of a setup as I do, and they also definitely don't have Snow Guard Hawk. That's like the main card I'm afraid of in this matchup, in addition to Rogue. Don't really want my Wong to get rogued, but there's only so much that you can play around. And with this Brood, now I'm feeling really confident that my opponent is not going to be able to Wong. They might be able to play Silver Surfer plus Absorbing Man or Silver Surfer plus Odin on the final turn of the game into the vault. But other than that, they're really not going to be able to do anything super impressive. This turn, they're just going to play 2 random 3-cost cards and not really even take advantage of the Loki discount. So I feel like I'm doing pretty good. And maybe I can even still do a little bit more crazy shenanigans with this. This has been something that I've been having a lot of fun doing recently, using Mystique to copy Sera's ongoing ability. Then on the final turn, you just get to dump your hand. Odin costs 4. Basically everything else costs 1, and that allows you to, like right now, I can go Silver Surfer, Odin, and then Absorbing Man the Odin re-triggering the Silver Surfer and the Ironheart and the Odin, which is just a bunch of triggers there. My opponent has a bunch of 3-cost cards in Limbo, but I'm just gonna have way more triggers than my opponent, and I even draw Wong on the final turn, so now I can just play Wong, Silver Surfer, Odin, which is like a few more triggers. There's a little bit of on-reveal math that you get to learn the more you play this deck, but my opponent at the very most will be able to activate Silver Surfer twice here, whether that is Wong plus Surfer, Surfer plus Absorbing Man, or Surfer plus Odin, and either of those plays, all 3 of those plays aren't going to cut it. We're going to be able to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're going to be able to get 6 Silver Surfer triggers, which is going to outscale my opponent in Limbo, regardless of the fact that they have 5 cards effectively in Limbo to my 3. It's going to be 5 times 2 versus 3 times 6, so that's 10 versus 18. So we are going to wind up getting some more results out of that, and we can see my opponent actually just has Luke Cage plus Silver Surfer. That one is definitely not going to cut it. That is not quite going to be enough. So yeah, they'll get 5 triggers effectively. I count Sebastian Shaw's like 1 additional trigger. Meanwhile, yeah, we're going to get a whole bunch. So we will sit through this for a second. I'm still really enjoying this deck. My opponent gives me the thumbs up there, so they are enjoying it as well. This is basically going to tie us up here. I'll actually have a 1 cube lead, but yeah, still enjoying this deck. I think that it's a little bit tough into some of the Professor X decks running around, but just because you want to set up your full combo and they can just slam down a Professor wherever you are trying to Wong or whichever location you're keeping open, that can definitely be a little bit annoying, but you can do some really fun stuff. The next game is fun just because how well these locations line up for the random cards that happen to be in this deck. We've got Luke Cage for Negative Zone, and then we've got Brood for Luke's Bar. Kind of a fail that Luke Cage doesn't do anything in Luke's Bar. They should probably, is it the same Luke? I think it is, right? Yeah, I think it is. They should rework Luke's Bar now that I think about it, though. Just switch Negative Zone and Luke's Bar. I think that solves all my problems here, because, yeah, there's all these other cards that work so much better than Luke Cage with Luke's Bar, and that doesn't make any sense. But Brood does work pretty well with Luke's Bar. My opponent's deck also works well with Luke's Bar because they can fill up their hand, and then whatever they play there is going to stay there. But we can still play Brood into Luke's, and that gives us a decent amount of power. It's basically like trying to figure out right now, kind of what I was talking about with that first match, which of these cards do I want to show my opponent that I have? Because once I show them the Brood, then they'll know that I've won in Luke's Bar. Once I show them Luke Cage, then they'll know that I've won in Negative Zone. So this match is a little bit just figuring out, like, where do we want to show our hand? Because if we show too much of our hand, then we're not going to be able to get that many cubes. We've already snapped and my opponent's already accepted the snap, so we're in for 2, but maybe we could get 4 out of this. Maybe my opponent thinks that they could do something in Luke's Bar and they wind up snapping. So those are definitely things running through my mind here. Snowguard Hawk is going to make my opponent think that maybe they can win Luke's Bar with a surprise Hawk on the final turn, or maybe they can Subterranea trigger again. Meanwhile, we have everything that we need already in our hand, so not really feeling too terribly about this Subterranea. We do have to figure out what we're doing on this turn, turn 5. We could play Sera, and then next turn we just go like Seabass, Luke Cage, Silver Surfer. Seems fine. That could certainly be a play. Or we could just play one of the cards now. I think that ultimately Sera is just going to be the most straightforward play, keeps our options open, and I might like I might still want to play this Brood as well. Brood is potentially a little bit better than Sebastian Shaw once I have the Luke Cage to flip me in negative zone, but there's a lot of options. Here we're going to see my opponent do the Luke's bar trick that I was talking about earlier. They fill their hand with Agent Coulson, and then Luke's bar cannot return the bear or the agent to my opponent's hand. So they're currently winning in Luke's bar, looking good for them, and that might just be enough for my opponent to stay in. And kind of one of like the secret strengths of Sera, maybe not so secret for a lot of players, but definitely one of the strong points of Sera is that you kind of cloak your plays and don't let your opponent know how you're planning on winning, and get to reserve your game plan till the final turn of the game. And here I decided that if my opponent is going to try to use Snowguard Hawk to win Luke's bar, that's fine. I'm not going to commit there. I could like play Sebastian Shaw into Luke's bar or something, or actually the play would be Luke Cage into Luke's bar, which would be fitting as well. And then I would play the Seabass over into negative zone. But if my opponent does not hawk me, then things get a little bit awkward. So ultimately I decide to not go for that and just battle for all 3 locations, and my opponent is just going to wind up retreating. So we take them there for 2 cubes, but now we have a very sizable lead here, 6-3. So we've got double their cubes as we move into the high stakes rounds, and a snap from either player is going to put my opponent in for the full Monty, and a Wakandan embassy pumps up Sebastian Shaw to kick this game off. Not snap worthy, but definitely good. My opponent with the turn 1 Quinjet, most of these games, Quinjet definitely an all-star. Space Throne is not a location that I love to see with this deck. However, it is a location where I can throw down the Seabass. We have not seen Shang-Chi or Shadow King from my opponent. That doesn't mean that they don't have them. I'm not playing with a tracker. I'm playing this on mobile. But it could still be a little bit of a reason to hang on to the Sebastian for a little while longer, and not just like run it out there. Maybe my opponent will Loki it away, or like at the very least I don't want to use Ironheart preemptively to pump up the Sebastian Shaw. I could still run it out there. It does let my opponent know a little bit about what's going on, but ultimately I think that this is a fine way to go, because maybe I will want to use Shadowland differently. Maybe I won't want to get the Brood out there just yet. My opponent's going to run out a turn 3 Hope Summers, and then on turn 4, what do we like here? We could just play the Wong. That's always good when you have 4 energy, and then I guess that just means next turn I'm playing Mystique, and then on the final turn of the game I'm hoping to play Brood plus Silver Surfer. That could be a nice way to make sure that my opponent has priority the entire time. That's the main reason not to play Brood earlier on. Just let my opponent win the one location where they're winning, and then Wong isn't going to add any additional wins here. I'll still be losing in Wakandan Embassy. So we can keep my opponent with priority. That's probably pretty good. They're going to play a Mockingbird this turn, fueled out a little bit early with the Ninja from Shadowland. And then here I do find Hazmat, and now I've got Hazmat plus Luke Cage. But I decide to go for Ironheart as well. Ironheart plus the Luke Cage. Maybe I don't. Yeah. There's a few different. Just changing up the order here. Yeah, my opponent has played a few cards into Shadowland, and now they're snapping. So this is tricky. Yeah, I think I like this play a little bit better. This doesn't open me up. No, I'm gonna mix it up one more time here. But why I like that play is it doesn't open me up to a Shadow King or a Shang-Chi from my opponent, as opposed to the Ironheart. So I think that could wind up being a little bit better. Oh, that's why. That's why. I'm expecting... Okay, I didn't remember this in the recap here, but now it makes sense. I know about Rogue. I know that my opponent probably has it, and when they snap, it's telling me, okay, Rogue is definitely coming, and it makes more sense to play around the cards that you know. Apologies, I played this a few days ago, played this like a day and a half ago, so a kind of forgetting about some of the details here, but I knew that my opponent was going to Rogue me, so I didn't want to Mystique my Wong on that turn. That makes a lot of sense. All right, good play, good play. Now I can only play one thing this turn, really. I mean, I can play Luke Cage plus Brood, but that doesn't grab me the win in Shadowland. So how do I get out of this? Well, Absorbing Man is just like, it's 12 power, and I think that that's the most power that I can put on the board. Luke Cage is like a similar amount of power, but Absorbing Man is potentially more power in Wakandan Embassy, which is the location that I'm going to need to play for. My opponent does play to Space Throne here, but luckily is not the Shang-Chi or the Shadow King. That's just going to be a Sentinel. Do they have enough in Wakandan Embassy? Loki for 14. It's going to mean I'm going to need to get a little bit not unlucky with these Ironheart triggers, but I should be able to get one card pumped up in Wakandan Embassy, and I actually get 2. So that is enough to take my opponent for 3 cubes. Good sport there for my opponent, and honestly, a really fun match overall. This last match also has some fun intricacies going on in it. My opponent playing kind of a brew. To be honest, not something that I have seen too much of. And we are going to want to get that Isle of Silence out of there, though my opponent is also playing a bunch of ongoing abilities. They're playing kind of like an ongoing Jean Grey deck. Kind of cool. Jean Grey is pretty annoying disruption for this deck, because typically I would love to be like setting stuff up for a big Wong play, but now I have to. So the other location that's awkward for this deck is the one where your 3 and 4 cost cards move to a location. Can't remember that off the top of my head right here. I don't think it'll come up for the rest of this video, but just like basically that's what we have to do. We've got to fill a location so that way we can start trying to combo off in one of the other locations. And I feel like we have the opportunity to do that here, because next turn we can play Sera, or we can play Mystique to copy the Sera, and then all of our cards will be really cheap on the final turn, which should still give us the ability to combo off and do some crazy stuff. So that is my thought process here, and the fact that we get to blank both the Man-Thing and the US Agent with our Luke Cage is definitely going to help us in this matchup. It is a little bit awkward. We are letting their nebulas get out of control, and coming up, one of, not this game, but one of the games, it's gonna be the biggest nebula that I've ever seen. Just because Jean Grey works so well with nebula, and then this deck kind of having to play 2 specific lanes to kind of do some interesting setup maneuvers makes for a really big nebula for my opponent. So this turn I'm just thinking Mystique, Sebastian Shaw, and I'm actually think I'm going to hang on to the Ironheart here as well. It's a tough call because you kind of want to play the Ironheart to fill Kunlun, so that way you don't have to play to Kunlun next turn. And I could even just play like multiple cards to fill Kunlun this turn. Like I could play Mystique. I have to play Mystique first. But ultimately, because I haven't drawn the Silver Surfer yet, I don't know if I'm going to draw Silver Surfer or Odin. And I want to prepare for both scenarios. However, then my opponent reveals a Cosmo in that center location. I'm glad they revealed it this turn. If they had flipped that over next turn, they probably could have gotten me for 8 cubes. And I draw Odin, so that's why like I'm happy that I kept the Ironheart here. I could have gone Wong, Ironheart, Odin. That would have been a really powerful play. Or Wong, Hazmat, Odin. That would have been a powerful play just the same. However, Now I can only play like Hazmat, Wong, Ironheart, or something weird. Like there's no good plays at this point because of that Cosmo just shutting down the center location. Once I play a card to Kunlun, the Mojo is going to activate, so my opponent will be at 20, which means I need to get like a bunch of Ironheart triggers to go into Kunlun, and that just doesn't seem super realistic. I would need so I'm going to have 9 Ironheart triggers this turn. I would need 6 of them to land in Kunlun. It's possible, but I don't want to risk it, and it's not mathematically likely. So I'm just going to retreat here for 2 cubes. I don't like that I've got a Cosmo to contend with as well as a Jean Grey, but I'm going to bide my time and try to find myself a better opportunity to go for a more reliable combo. This game could work. Brood plus Absorbing Man and Kiln. Kiln could be a location that I'm able to battle for. However, my opponent's Ant-Man is saying, hey, I want to battle for Kiln as well. So they're not just going to let me have it for free, which some players will do when you've got the Brood and Absorbing Man to just be able to make so much early power. So that's going to be a little bit awkward. Mojo is going to again say, yeah, I'm battling here. And I throw out the Hazmat early on because my opponent is also playing Luke Cage. So I really don't want to get into a position where that's something that I'm even like considering. I know I just brought it up in the last game, but I'm just saying like thought process wise. I obviously realized you can't play Hazmat into your opponent's Luke Cage. So there you go. I play the Broodlings in Xandar first with the idea that maybe I could play the Absorbing Man Broodlings into the Kiln this turn, where I need a little bit more power. And then my plan from here is Silver Surfer on the Dream Dimension turn into Dream Dimension as well, and then Odin into Dream Dimension on the final turn for 1 more Brood trigger. And that Omega Red is going to be a little bit nasty because that's going to give my opponent priority, which means that if my opponent has Cosmo, they can really get me here. Silver Surfer puts me up to a place where I can actually tie my opponent right now in Kiln. We'll get up to 18 in the Kiln this turn, 22 in the Kiln next turn from that Odin trigger. And I wonder if it would have been better if I had just played the Brood in the Kiln, and that way I would have been able to beat Omega Red, but tying Omega Red at least turns it off. By the way, this really surprised me to see Punisher come down for 7 power. Part of that is from Xandar and being up against the Broodlings, but I'm like a 3-7. That's pretty dang good. And we're going to try to finish this one off with Odin. We will have 10 power in Dream Dimension. We're definitely winning in Xandar, and then hoping that just hoping to beat my opponent in Dream Dimension, and I think that's going to be possible. Hoping that once we turn off Omega Red, they're not going to be able to put enough power in Dream Dimension to contend, but unfortunately, they do have the Cosmo here. We will actually get a tie in Dream Dimension. Oh no, we won't because of US Agent. So they take me for 4 cubes. Not a great start to this final match here, unfortunately. 4 cubes to 10 for my opponent. So yeah, this is going to be tough. The Cosmo, trying to battle through it. I thought that was a good enough opportunity that I felt like I had to go for it. Cosmo, like, my opponent is going to be so likely to have Cosmo in games where I've magicked. That wasn't a magic game as well. But the big deciding factor there was just that my opponent had priority from that big Omega Red. This game, I'm going to snap on turn 2 after seeing Gamma Lab. That's really good for my Broodlings, and seeing that my opponent is going to retreat. Typically not a style of deck, I would imagine, that has Shang-Chi from my opponent here, this Jean Grey list. So they are going to retreat from the snap in Gamma Lab. But that's only 1 cube. We need to win 9 more. So we are kind of up against it here, a little bit awkward. Reasonable hand here, and my opponent leads off with the turn 1 Nebula. Okay, I'll spoil it. This is where my opponent is going to make the biggest nebula that I have ever seen. And we get Magik, and I'm going to go for Magik in the sewer system this turn. I'm not exactly sure what made me go for the sewer system as opposed to Stark Tower, but I guess I figured I kind of want to play cards into Stark Tower, and I want to play cards against Nebula, so it's kind of fine if those two locations line up. But my opponent is going to Jean Grey over in Limbo, so I'm going to have to put some more cards over there. But this is my moment. My opponent just played Cosmo like way too early here. My opponent's trying to fill up Limbo so that they can play some more cards and get some more power at the other location. Big mistake, as Q would say, because now Cosmo's down, shields are down. We're going to be able to get a bunch of on reveals going on here, and that is going to start with Sera to make our cards a little bit cheaper, and then I do have to fill up Limbo before we can get on out of here, but I'm going to have a fantastic final turn. I'll just go through it right now. We're just going to play the Broodling to fill up Limbo, and then Wong in Dark Dimension, and then next turn I get to play Mystique, Silver Surfer, Absorbing Man, that Silver Surfer, and that is going to be 8 Silver Surfer triggers, which should be enough to still grab the win in Dark Dimension. The second 4 of those Silver Surfer triggers will pump up the Silver Surfer itself, and then we're going to have a bunch of pumps over into Limbo, some of those on Sebastian Shaw, and that's going to be more than enough to overcome this mojo, and I don't have to be afraid of Cosmo. If my opponent just like saved the Cosmo for Dark Dimension, probably no way I can win this game, and you almost forget about the fact that my opponent has a 15 power Nebula because I just did not play into Nebula on a single turn in a 7-turn game, and it also got pumped up by Stark Tower. I'll admit I was a little bit nervous to see my opponent play 4 cards into Dark Dimension. Maybe they can come up with something cool here. But honestly, it's not going to be enough. Man-Thing plus US Agent and Omega Red, not quite enough for the full Silver Surfer combo. And like I said, that's 8 triggers on the Mystique and then 4 triggers on the Silver Surfer. So that will be honestly just barely enough because all of these cards are losing a little bit of power from US Agent or Man-Thing. And this gets very close. Limbo's not close, Stark Tower's not close, but Dark Dimension winds up being a really close location for us this game, and you can do the math with us. Each of these are going to give +4, which means we're going to get +16 in Dark Dimension and wind up with a total of 20 power against my opponent's 18. So it's about as close as you can get it, and that will mean that we are still behind by 1 cube, but it's close. My opponent with 5 cubes remaining and us with 4 cubes remaining. So let's see if we can clutch it out. We're in high stakes mode now, and we've got Muir Island, which is a pretty good location for this deck. It's also a reasonable location for my opponent's deck, though. Again, I'm going to run out the Hazmat on turn 2 because I don't want to mess around with the Luke Cage of it all. And I was originally thinking Seabass was going to go in Muir Island, but now I might just rather play Seabass in Throne Room, and I can Brood in Muir Island, and that might be good for me. If my opponent Jean Greys, though, I kind of want to have access to Brood, so ultimately I'm going to decide to hang on to this Brood, and I'm glad that I did, because now I can easily fill up Westview and then start trying to set up my combo in Throne Room. Deep Space, I was initially thinking was going to be bad for me, but it actually means Jean Grey is turned off. And with that, my opponent is going to retreat, which means we have a cube lead for the first time in this match. So definitely things are looking up here. High stakes mode still. This game winds up being super wacky, super weird, because we've got Weird World, and Weird World coming at the end of a conquest match when both of you are like pretty familiar with each other's decks can lead to some really fun counterplay. And then on top of that, we've got Mindscape. So we're going to be taking each other's decks and then we might give them back at some point too. By the way, my opponent snaps here, which is a really bad snap, just a learning moment here. I should have snapped. I actually should have snapped turn 1 when you have 4 cubes to your opponent's 3 and you're already in high stakes mode. Basically, if I lose a cube, if I have 1 cube or 2 cubes in the next game, both of those are the same to me. Whereas if my opponent has 1 cube or 0 cubes, that's a huge difference. That's the difference between being able to play and not being able to play. So I should have snapped turn 1. My opponent snaps, so I don't have to. But yeah, just a little learning moment there I thought was interesting. Another thing that's really interesting in this matchup, so like, I don't know if my opponent potentially has the Cosmo already. That might be why they're feeling confident and feeling like they should snap. They also potentially have Magik, which gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to control either Weird World or Mindscape and potentially catch me off guard, which I think is also something that they might think is strong, but it's something that I am also pretty aware of. My opponent plays Jean Grey on turn 4, but not before I can drop Omega Red into Weird World, which is huge because now I am winning in Weird World, which means I have priority and means that Omega Red is active, and that's going to be really tough for them to stop as well. They might play Brood this turn, but like they can only really play 1 card, and I'm kind of thinking they might just wind up playing Magik here. I think that that is a very real possibility. I decided to use Mystique to copy Omega Red's ability, just again because this was like the best way to fill up the curve, and now I'm not giving them that much if they don't have the Magik, but they do, which means we get to hang on to both Wong and Spectrum. Didn't really talk about the Spectrum too much. Kind of had a feeling my opponent was playing a Spectrum deck with all of the ongoing cards that we saw out of them, but now we can finally confirm it, and we get the best possible draw on turn 6. Mojo to fill up Limbo is going to allow me to play Wong this turn to set up for a Wong Spectrum, which is just super sweet, and I'm going to play the Wong over into Weird World. That way I can guarantee that I win that location, pump up Omega Red, get that spread around, and then be able to win that center Limbo as well, hopefully, and pump that out. We've got the Cosmo here. We could try to disrupt Silver Surfer, try to disrupt what my opponent is doing, but at this point, I think I'm doing something better. I've got the Wong, I've got the Mystique, so there's not that much my opponent can come up with other than like Silver Surfer plus Absorbing Man and maybe Sebastian. But even that, I don't think is super scary at this point, and I think we are in for a nice little win here to take my opponent. This was a really, really fun and close match with my opponent having a lot of powerful disruptive tools, but ultimately I do believe we are going to come out on top here with this wonged up Spectrum play. That's just a whole bunch of points because Spectrum also being 7, so and then it also pumps up Wong, which is something Silver Surfer doesn't even get to do. But my opponent will have Ironheart, Silver Surfer, Absorbing Man. It's a decent amount of points, but it is unfortunately going to fall short, and we will get the win. And with that, my first Infinity ticket of the series, one of my earliest Infinity tickets. I brought this up in a previous video, but I no longer play Proving Grounds or Silver Conquest. I just jump right into using gold tickets from the collection track. So this was the first gold ticket that I spent this season, as you can see, and was able to grab an infinite ticket right off the bat. Not too shabby. That's going to be it for me today. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.